My name is Brett Little. I'm the education manager here at the GreenHome Institute. The GreenHome Institute is a nonprofit with a mission to empower people to make healthier and more sustainable choices in the renovation and construction of the places we live. Today, I will be helping moderate and facilitate this session for Solar and Battery Storage 101. We are, as I mentioned, live on site at the Green Panel office in Byron Center, Michigan. So they have a solar demonstration center here. So I'm excited for everyone who's joining us in the real world and virtually as well. Thanks again to the Green Panel for opening up their space for us. And thanks again to our nearly 300 supporting members and our top tier sponsors like Mitsubishi and Reed for supporting the work that we do here today. And before we kick it off, I just wanted to say that from my perspective, I'm excited to be here filming live because the Green Panel is actually a supplier of my solar and storage systems within my own house. And so every time we broadcast to you live during our Wednesday webinars, we'll be 100% powered by their solar systems. And our accountant as well in Grand Rapids, Michigan is set up to the Green Panel through solar and storage. So again, GHI and some of our staff and our workforce is getting powered by solar, which is what we believe in for decarbonization. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand it off to Dan here, who's going to introduce himself from the Green Panel and take us through Solar Power 101 and storage. So thank you all, and Dan, take it away.
Thanks, sir. Okay, as that picture suggests, I'm Dan Terpstra. I do work with the Green Panel. It is a relatively recent change for me. And because of that, I like to tell the story of how I got here and how what solar means to me in my story, and kind of how it got us here to the Green Panel. I appreciate everybody coming out to see. It's nice having a showroom where you can actually see the products, the batteries, the different solar panels and everything. With this all being said, I'm kind of using slides to keep myself in line. I have been a fan of solar for a long time, ever since I heard about it when I was a kid and thought this is the greatest thing. But what we've always heard is solar doesn't work in Michigan. I've especially heard about, I moved to Tennessee as a kid. I lived in Grand Rapids, and we're the second cloudiest city in the US, and we always hear. So solar's cool, just not for me. At some point about 2-3 years ago, I decided maybe that wasn't true. So I started searching because other people are getting solar panels, maybe I should. When I decided to get solar panels, I realized there's a lot of different people who can provide solar panels and installations. I was getting a little overwhelmed by it because there's so much information. So I ended up going to my building inspector in Grand Rapids and basically saying, can you help me understand what I should look for, if there's any specific things for my system in Grand Rapids? And what we're looking at on the screen, apparently I only see the screen, but what we're seeing on the screen is my house. And it's a funny little house sitting in the northeast side of Grand Rapids that I knew would be challenging. So I asked the building inspector, what should I do? And he very quickly told me that a lot of solar installers will use lag bolts and flashing and tar and things to secure the panels to a roof, which essentially is damaging their roof. There's a good chance with wind and other things that you'll actually create leaks if you're lag bolting to it. So he told me, whatever you do, if somebody's using lag bolts, run. He said, I said, well, what should you do? Is there a right way? And he said, roof tech blocks, which is a photo of roof tech blocks on a roof there. He said, those essentially will not leak. He said, the biggest thing Grand Rapids has is leaky roofs with lag bolts. So he said, the only way to not do that is use roof tech blocks. I went back to the 6 or so companies that I was talking to and said, how do you attach them? Oh, we use flashing. It's the tried and true method. So they're out. Every one of them was that way. The Green Panel at that time, out of about 5 or 6 companies, was the only one doing these roof tech blocks. So I decided the green panel was going to be my roof. A lot of things popped up as confusing to me because I kind of came from a world of Legos and toys that you could just put things together, and I kind of thought, we're just going to add solar panels. It's going to be like a 40-minute thing. They're going to come in and it's going to be fast and easy. What we can actually see in that picture is the rails on my house. That was at the end of day one. They ended up putting the rails on the house before the panels were up, and that's when I learned how much wiring there was and everything else. With the whole idea of Legos, one of the things I really learned was having a good installation crew was pivotal. I had guys that were very respectful and clean, and they worked as a team, which is great. I recommend for anybody thinking about solar, find out if the people are local, find out if they live locally, so they're going to be able to come back if something goes wrong. There's a lot of people who are not, and so you got a company from Utah or whatever. One reason I was so happy is because I could just call these people who were local in town. But as you see, we have a guy sitting on my roof, kind of a fun thing for me to see because I'm seeing it all coming to life. When it was finally done, there's some confusion. Things that people don't really always realize about solar is the utility actually controls how much power you can put on your roof or the backyard or wherever you put it, and control the timeline and everything. So when my solar panels are there, I'm going, great, we have solar. They go, you gotta wait about 10 days. And so about 10 days later, all of a sudden my solar came to life, and I suddenly had proof that I'm making solar. One of the biggest things we get asked about solar that I feel like is very important to talk about is it's cloudy. Does solar work through clouds? I would be one of the first people to say it works, but it doesn't work as well. And essentially, meteorologist George Lesson said to me, he goes, well, your solar works if you have non-overcast skies. Overcast skies means you have 3 or 4 layers of clouds. You don't really get solar with 3 or 4 layers. You can have 2 layers of clouds and they're going to work fine. But what we see in my little slide there is 24 months of what my solar generated at my house. It's a realistic look at what would you expect with solar. So with that, you look and you say, geez, it's very obvious that June does 10 times more generation than January. And in February, oddly enough, does twice as much as December. So why would I do solar in Michigan? Well, ultimately, because the summer days are everything for us. I mean, anybody who lives in Michigan knows you celebrate when summer comes because you can go to the beach and, go out hiking and do everything else. But that is a representation of a day at my house when solar was generating 4 or 5 times more energy than I was using. So you see the orange on the bottom is how much we're using. So you see those little spots where they dip up. That's probably me starting to dry or maybe somebody using the microwave or something like that. But you see all those that big blue arch, that is the sun sending energy into my house. You see at the top, there are these little spots that say how much I produced, how much I imported, how much I exported. In the yellow there, import and export are the 2 things I look at. I imported 16 kilowatts that day and I exported 52. Not bad. Especially if you're in West Michigan and you have somebody like Consumers Energy or Indiana, Michigan Power, one of those guys who gives you a pretty good credit rate, it works out pretty well. So is it worth doing in Michigan? I wholeheartedly say yes. And I live in Grand Rapids, which is the 2nd cloudiest city in the US. But to be fair, they're not always those days, but boy, do I celebrate those days. One of the things that when people come to us and they say they want to get solar, it's the biggest struggle because we need 2 major bits of information to understand what they can do with solar. We need their address. People sometimes don't think they do. Just give me a price. Just give me a price. Let me know how much solar costs. We need the address, and it's really helpful to get the bill. The bill gives us an idea how much you use
And that gives the utility an idea how much they're going to let you put on your house. So we have the calculations that Consumers Energy and DTE use to say, hey, if you're using this much power, we'll let you put this many panels on. Once people give us this, we put it into an Excel spreadsheet and it works fine. But that's one of the biggest challenges we start with, is people giving us that information. The next thing is, once you sign up for solar, you say, I want to do it, I'm ready to do this. There's a bit of a timeline that goes into it. It has, first and foremost, the utility has to approve the panels, which is typically right now about 4 weeks, I'd say, give or take. The other one is your municipality. I'm in the city of Grand Rapids. City of Grand Rapids does not make it easy. There's city of Ann Arbor doesn't always make it easy. If you live in the country, they don't care. They'll let you put solar panels anywhere practically. But the timeline for us in the city of Grand Rapids is about 4 weeks on a permit going through. In Jenison, it might be 4 days. Literally, some of these areas let it go very quickly, but that is part of the process. So we don't start putting solar panels on until we've gotten approval from both the utility and your city. So once you get to do it, sorry, I got to catch up to where I am. I'm not just looking at my favorite installers there on the screen. Some of the things that people will say is, I want to put solar panels to the edges of my roof, to all corners of it. Maybe if it's the perfectly sized pole barn, we can do that. But if it's the dwelling you live in, the cities can dictate how close the panels are to the edge. So that's a consideration people should think about when they're doing solar panels is, they look and they go, well, I've got this big area here, I bet I can get 8 panels on. Well, if the city can't, if the supposedly fireman can't walk along the side of it, then we essentially can't put the panels there. So we need to, as you see on that house there, we have a little space on the top and the edge and the bottoms and everything for people to walk around. Another special note, that house in particular, the panels behind those guys, that roof faces the street. The city fought those panels for 8 weeks. And essentially, I'm saying this is a low pitch roof. It's in a neighborhood, blah, 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 blah. I finally went down in person and they said, okay, we'll approve it, which is hilarious. The customer who's had those panels now turned on for about a week, he says, boy, those front panels are my most productive panels in my house. That's one of the things about working with solar people who actually know the models and the software and everything, is make sure you get the best possible location for your panels and hope that the city doesn't fight you for 8 weeks. Which Dale might be into some of that sometime soon too. So when we were just talking about offsets, I have this beautiful house up in Rockford that just got solar panels. These guys have a hot tub and electric appliances and everything. If he could have, he wanted 40 panels on his house. Well, the problem is his roof doesn't fit 40 panels. So you can kind of see that we had to leave those setbacks on the garage so people could walk up around the garage. We had to leave them on the top roof so people could safely walk on that roof. But in the grand scheme, you have a very professional looking install, so it at least doesn't look like garbage when it's done. The guy Daniel on our crew said, I'm going to spray paint all the conduit to make it black so it'll look better with everything. That's a nice touch that he does. So somebody might say, well, I want 40 panels, but it doesn't fit. I'm in Rockford, I have 6 acres of land, whatever. How can I do this? Well, obviously we always have the possibility of a ground mount system. Ground mount systems are probably my favorite way to put solar in somebody's house. It's close to the ground. You can face them exactly south. You can put them at the right angles, so no matter what, they're going to get the best mix between summer and winter. If I see the sun shining and see 6 inches of snow on my solar panels, I'm freaking out. Well, on a ground mount system, I can go out with a regular sized broom and clean them off. That is a huge, huge benefit with ground mounts. They obviously need the land. They need the space. They need to not have trees looming over them. A lot of people will wonder, what a good space is. It's all these things to consider. Does it face south? In my personal opinion, south is the best. East is the second best and west is the third. North, just don't, it's just not worth the money. But sometimes you have to if you only have that space. Ultimately, I think I kind of already talked about timelines a little bit. Once we get the approval from the utility, once we get the approval from the city and everything, and we have all the products in stock, we got to get guys up on the roof to actually do the work. We here use a team of typically 5 people on the ground. One guy is doing all of the electrical work with the panels. He's doing putting in the communication system. Another couple or a few guys are putting the panels on the roof. Somebody else is running wires. But in the grand scheme, like that house I showed earlier that had panels everywhere, that's like a 3-day installation. I'd say be patient. It takes a little bit of time to do it right. If anything, you want your solar done right. We hear a lot of horror stories about out-of-state people putting solar in where they have fires and other things go wrong. They're rushing it to get it done in one day. It's not worth it. So we try to say patience is a pretty big part of it. I just like to see Dan looking like he's really concentrating in that shot. He wants to make sure it's perfect. So one of the things that you don't really see here on these close-up shots is these guys are all strapped in. They're not going to, if they slip on the roof and they fall, they're not going to fall off the roof, at least. But they're all trained. Dan's been with us for 3 years, give or take. These guys have actually, the people that I had on one of the earlier pictures, 3 of those guys were on my roof 2 years ago. I'm pretty proud of a company that can retain their installation guys, because the construction industry isn't always that kind with that kind of thing. So more of guys just working. That's just that, to me, that's kind of the most important part of the solar business, is who's actually putting the panels on, who's communicating. People at home can't see it, but in front of me I have Jake, who is our interconnect person. His whole job is to talk to the utilities, and when the utilities go, we think you can only get this many panels, he's the guy that actually makes sure it happens. One of the elements people don't really know or understand about solar is, especially if you're in West Michigan, if you have Consumers Energy, most of our meters that, people come by and read the meter and see how much you're using, most of the meters were born bilingual. They can see incoming and outgoing energy. The problem is when they're installed at your house, they're only given one ability, and that is to see incoming. So charge you, that's all they can do. Without a person like Jake on your team, you might not have the bilingual thing turned on. They might not switch the meter to actually give you proper credit for the energy you might be sending back to them. So it's a big deal to me to look to people like Jake to take care of that thing. We also have people like Allie, who's not here today, who she takes care of all of our permitting and things. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, everybody has kind of a different reason for doing solar. Maybe I thought I was going to save the planet. Maybe I thought I was going to pay for my own electricity. Some people do it because they want to give a fist to the man, or they think the government's taking over, whatever. At this beautiful house in Grand Haven, if you're flying a drone directly above their house, you see Port Sheldon. Port Sheldon is the power plant out in West Olive, and Port Sheldon is shutting down in the next year. I feel we might need to get more solar panels if we're going to shut down Port Sheldon. So that's the funny part. You see this house on the beach, beautiful 3-story house. You can see in the distance this little tiny smokestacks in the back. That's Port Sheldon. These guys basically made the decision to handle their own power creation. I'll get a little closer to that house. This house, they filled it up pretty well. They actually could push the rules on where the panels were, but that is not everywhere where we can do that. But that is a great example of somebody taking, count them all. That's somebody taking control of it. Anyway, one of the things I didn't talk about so much is batteries, and I'd be glad to either answer questions about batteries directly with people, or I might actually pull in somebody else to talk about it where they have a little bit more ability with it. But one of the batteries can serve many different functions. Batteries are a backup device for your solar, or not your solar, but just your house in general. I used to live in between here and Lake Michigan. Our power would go out all the time. Perfect place for me to have batteries, because then you can just keep running. It's fantastic. A thing that most people don't know about solar, without a battery system, your solar shuts off if the grid goes down. So if your grid, if the power goes out, your solar has to shut down for the safety of the line workers. Essentially, you're making a lethal amount of energy on top of your roof when what you're not using sends back. If what's getting sent back happens when somebody's trying to fiddle with the lines, they're going to get a shock, so it gets shut off. One way where that doesn't happen is with power walls or a battery backup solution. Battery backups can be used in many different ways, from just being a backup system, like I'm saying. People who say have an electric car and they work out of the house and they work away from the house in the daytime, they can charge their battery in the daytime when the solar is there, and then they can power their car or charge their car with the batteries. They can also use it to sort of manipulate your bills a little bit. You use battery at night instead of taking it from the grid. I personally like my situation in Grand Rapids, where my power never goes out, or when it goes out, it only goes out for 90 minutes. And my solar I have a cooperative relationship with Consumers Energy. In the daytime, I make a bunch of energy and I send it to them. And at night, when I get up and go to the bathroom, I turn the light on and it still works. That works out pretty well for me. But with that being said, I think I'd like to open up to any questions that people have about solar. Okay, so essentially, and you're in Ann Arbor, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so in Ann Arbor, in case you didn't hear at home, she has a ton of solar already on her house, but has a full electric house, and they're going more full electric with heat pumps and things like that to power it. Then there's to heat the house. Takes a lot of energy to do that. And so one of the questions is, I'm going to start with the easy one first. Different municipalities like Lansing, are they any easier? I think from Jake's perspective, Holland is the hardest. Grand Rapids is probably middle. Lansing is probably easier. Ann Arbor is a funny thing, because Ann Arbor says, we want everybody to do this renewable thing, but don't touch the trees, or don't, there's a whole bunch of elements that they don't want to have changed. So it depends on the municipality. I think Detroit is actually easier. I don't know if that's absolutely positive, but I think they make it easier for their residents to do it. I find in general, the bigger the municipality, the slightly more difficult it is. I just spoke to the head building inspector 2 weeks ago. And he said, we keep changing the rules, because every time an insurance company comes back to us and says, why did you let them do this? We buckle down and make it harder. And so the bigger the system, the more chance they're going to have complaints. So they keep changing it. In terms of future proofing, which was the first major question, that is a challenge, because the technology is moving fast. 5 years ago, a microinverter could only do 200 watts, give or take. And now they're doing 349 watts. And so where I put solar panels on my house 2 years ago with 290 watt microinverters, if I want to put more panels on, I probably want to update those to use more or get more utilization out of them. Essentially, one thing we do a lot of, and what's going to happen at my house very soon, is we're going to have a second end phase system, which is the brain, and then the two will tie together, but they're not the same, because they're two different brains. We have a lot of people right now who are like, Consumers Energy only allows me to do this, but I'm buying an electric car in a year. Consumers Energy doesn't work on wishes, unfortunately. And they won't let it happen just because you're buying it in a year. One thing I probably should have said before is Consumers Energy looks at your usage in history or your receipt that you actually bought something. They don't go on theories on anything. I think that I don't know if you had a question or after that.
Well, I just wanted to add to that concept, because I think that's, if I understand correctly, concern in any utility, right? They're trying to make sure you're not putting on more power, right, than what you're consuming over the year. So how is it that if you have other electrical devices, or like you had mentioned, Lauren, electrifying everything,
where we're having people swap out gas and going all electric, and they want to get more solar because of that. How do you handle that?
So I'm gonna go back one half step. The thing about the utilities not wanting you to create too much more, they are willing to send you credits so you can keep working off of solar that you previously did. But they just, at least the big ones, never want to send you a check. They never want to write a check and send it to you. So that's why they dictate how much power you create, essentially. That's an oversimplification, but what we are doing right now, house we just did in Rockford, we're buying an electric car. Well, right now you can only put 12 panels on your house, because right now that's all you have to use, or all you're using. They're putting bigger, they're I guess you're calling it retrofitting. We're putting bigger wire in to handle future panels connected to it, so we can at least update it later. There's another house I'm working on that he's putting 39 panels, and then we're going to put another ground mount system out here once I get all of our family on electric cars. And that was one where it's like, it just makes more sense that because this huge, they're in the middle of building the house, just run more tubes out. You know, when we can help people plan that, it's fantastic. There's a lot of them we can't help plan. The ones that are especially difficult are ones we didn't put in to begin with. If we are forming the relationships with people and helping them get their first solar, we are trying to understand their needs enough to say, okay, instead of using a 10 gauge wire, which you could do for a few panels, use an 8 gauge or 6 gauge or whatever to handle more down the road. The challenge comes when you're down the road is so many years later that the microinverters are less available. That is one of the challenges that we run into all the time. And what we're doing most of the time is adding a second system and then connecting them together.
Another question that came in from Thomas in the audience here is about roofing type. So kind of the question is the difference between asphalt, shingle, and metal roofing and what you do there. And then the follow-up, he's wondering, you know, when you have to replace the roof, what's going on at that point? Great question. So I don't know if you could hear that, but essentially roofing differences. I have a shingle roof at my house, asphalt shingles. The guy who was working at the green panel at the time, I said to him, what do you think, you know, if I put these on? And he goes, well, these panels are going to last at least 25 years. How long is your roof going to last? I pulled a couple roofers in. The roofer's like, yeah, you got 10 years. I made the expensive decision. I'm changing it now because what I tell people, what the gentleman told me is, he goes, you're paying for the installation now. Next time you're going to pay to have them taken off, and you're going to pay to have them put back on again. Might as well get your roof done now. So I put a 50-year malarkey roof on, so hopefully I would never have to do it. If I had the chance to do it over again, I would do a metal roof. The standing seam metal, not the agricultural pole barn roofs that have the bumpy stuff, but for people in the showroom, you can see a standing seam metal roof behind you. That's where the steel goes up and buckles together. When it is a standing, and this is the one I had on an earlier slide that I'm just going to zoom back so that people can see that closer up. One more, maybe. That is a standing seam metal roof with these guys. So what happens with a standing seam metal roof is we clamp on. We literally aren't having to screw the panels in. We're clamping to the metal roof. I can see a lot of benefits for that. People, the metal roof costs more. But boy, oh boy, if your solar panels perform for 40 years, it'll be nice that you have a roof that's going to last 100, you know? So I personally would say, try to get the roof ahead of time. If you want to have them taken off and put back on again, you can. It's costly. No matter what, it has a crew of 5 guys. It takes them a day to get them off and a day to put them back on again. And part of it is, at our company, can't speak for everybody, we don't rush it. We want to do everything with quality because they don't want to come back. You know, they want to get everything done so it's right the first time. And when you don't want to rush it, we got to pay them all day. So I'd say get the roof ahead of time if it was me. Unless you've got 18 years left on the roof. Any other questions in the audience here?
I've been exploring this thing called solar power.
Yeah,
And I'm not sure, I've got a perfect ideal spot on a pole barn, steel roof, that rigid, but.
yeah.
But it's a new modern roof. What is your thoughts on this solar power versus these ones up on the roof?
So.
Snow removal is my big concern. Like,
Yeah, so my pitch of my roof, I can't remember the right number, but it's 22.5 degrees. It will theoretically come off of my roof, but typically it happens about 4 o'clock when the sun has gone down. It goes down, that's too bad. I have not recently seen the solar flower thing. When I first saw it, they were not very powerful panels. So there's a question of efficiency. And I'm in a very strange way, I'm looking at the similar in wind, which is the Netherlands tulip wind generators. They're beautiful. They look like kinetic energy. They're gorgeous. And they're the 16-foot ones generate 2 kilowatts an hour. It's fantastic. That's the one thing I look at is how much power does it create? Because in the grand scheme, when you put the panels behind you there on the standing seam roof, those are 360 watt panels. I believe, and I could be wrong in this, last I knew the flowers were like 300 watts total or 400 watts total. And then you need a forest of them in order to generate the same that you can put on top of your pole barn. So that's one of the things is it looks cool. It looks like progress. It's fun. But if it's not efficient to me, I kind of yeah. So for the 25 grand, just a point of reference, you can probably put a 12 kW in. 12 kW flat. So one of the things I didn't say in the beginning, I've been obsessed with renewable energy for 30 of my 50 years. And I have watched it and been like, well, in France, they can do this. It's always been, it's somewhere else, they can do this. And one of the things that happens, at least from experience, is all of these things exist. One of the challenging things is the gentleman I talked to yesterday said, well, can we get these motorized? Absolutely could. It definitely adds an element of maintenance that when we have people here, we have a ground mount system that's way off the ground over there. Kind of shows how we put our ground mount system in, but it's tall enough that you can walk under it, which normally it's not. They're close to the ground. Very little maintenance. It's just going to work. And that's one of our keys here at the Green Panel is we want to put panels on that are just going to work, and we don't really get into too many gimmicks. And I'm not saying that those things aren't cool when I call it a gimmick, but there's a question of cost right now and a question of efficiency. And then of course, a question for us, if we put a motorized thing in, what happens if somebody calls up in 6 months and says this is broken? Somebody wants us to come out and get it quick. At this particular time, it'd be very hard for us to do that. I did so because I'm who I am. I went to the city of Grand Rapids. Before I learned that I could put a ground mount system in my backyard, I wanted to put awnings on the side. And the city said, well, I want you to cover up the windows, and windows are a problem. And I said, when I built the house, there were no windows. I added 2 windows. You have a rule about the windows, even though you didn't have it before. And the guy said, well, arguably your awning system looks better than the windows anyway. And it's funny because it's harder for us to do because there's a lot more engineering to make sure your house can handle it and everything. So it's ultimately we do mostly just the roofs and the ground because they're efficient and something we do every day. But I believe we're going to see that stuff get better and better. Traveling through the Netherlands, I rode my bike, pedaled through the Netherlands. There's at one point I went through a park and I had all these turbines turning, but I didn't know they were turbines. I thought they were art. And I was like, oh, it's art prize. And they're beautiful. It looks cool. They're yellow and blue and red and blah, blah, blah. And at the end, there's a little sign in Dutch that I had used to translate on my phone to look at it. And it said, the town of Honshoven or whatever it is powered entirely by this park. They currently have the infrastructure. Actually, a friend of mine, I've met him in person a few times, but a friend on Facebook, his job is maintaining those. And that's something that I think we're going to see here, but it's going to take a little bit of time for people to really get to it. We talk a lot about progress. Progress is slow in America sometimes.
Dan, on a storage note,
people who are maybe concerned about the cost, right, of the typical battery systems. There's some discussion here going on in the chat about comparing the systems to, your standard backup gas generator. But if I understand right, there are some, what they call critical peak systems out there that may be critical load systems that can sort of segment your heating and cooling or your refrigerator. And it's not a full battery, but when the grid goes down, your solar can still power those. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so essentially, what Brett from the GreenHome Institute asked was comparing batteries to generators and their capacity, what they can handle overall. Just like in a generator situation, if you don't have a big enough generator, you might have to do a critical load panel. So critical load for some people it's different for some than others. It's most of us don't want our freezers going out. That's probably the number one. Maybe your heat. Some people who are in the country don't want their sump pumps going out. They need to get a battery that's going to last long enough to cover all of those things that are most crucial. It's funny, they actually say to you, and also you need one USB charger. It's kind of a big brick. But essentially you size your batteries to what is most necessary. At my house, if I wanted everything to run just as normal for 2 days, I might need 4 batteries because we have a lot of consumption. Batteries are not inexpensive, but you have to weigh out the difference of need versus price in that situation. If I were to do the batteries, I'd probably do critical load, and I do the heat, what am I trying to say? The freezers, all of these things that are necessary, and not do air conditioning, and not do the big heavy items. I don't know if I got.
Well, I think the question kind of was, aren't there non-battery systems, non-gas generator systems that can also provide you some power during an outage?
You mean from your solar panels?
Yeah, from the solar panels.
Yeah, so Brett's talking about the idea that I'm saying that if you have solar panels on and the grid goes down, you need to have a Tesla power wall. That's not 100% accurate, because you could buy an N-phase box for an IQ8 system, which will allow you to get basics from your solar. The problem is it's about as expensive as it's actually not as expensive battery. It's about $8,000 compared to a $14,000 battery, and its system is pretty limited. It's like a 60 amp, I think. So they do a critical load. That's actually the guy who said you could plug in a USB port to. It was Enphase who said, our system can do the basics, but it works on the same principle that your combiner box in your solar says, even though the grid's down, we're going to still power these things, if that makes sense. We at the Green Panel did a thing with Consumers Energy where somebody took a bunch of cottages out on a lake south of town and said, we're going to turn these into full houses. The problem is Consumers Energy did not have the infrastructure to deal with a bunch of daytime consumption there. So we did a thing with batteries there for those guys so they could kind of level things out. One of the challenges when it comes to the group buy is sometimes it's, hi, I'm Lauren, I'm from Ann Arbor. I'm doing this and I have 8 other neighbors who are going to likely do it too. It's hard to give this one on the hopes that this one does it, but we have definitely had situations where people come in and say, these 10 people are all agreeing to it at the same time, and it helps out for sure. It needs to be fairly organized to have that happen. But the gentleman who's sitting in the back there that works with us, he has a condo in Detroit that he can't put solar panels on, but he has a power wall sitting in his closet, I think. I don't know exactly where it is, but he's got a power wall in his house. And that is very common for the elderly question. There are a lot of folks who are in old folks' homes or apartments that they will get a single power wall because they either need oxygen machines to work or they need, ventilation or something like that. And that is a great option, especially going back to being a cheap Dutch guy again. They've probably saved better than I have. So they're like, they can actually buy a battery, and it's great because it's a lifesaver. It's literally a lifesaver for some of those people. Something that definitely we've done before, because there's a lot of different questions that come out there, and we've fulfilled a lot of them. So essentially, Ryan, our operations manager, who's been a lot deeper in this than I have for a lot longer, is comparing a battery to a generator, and essentially a generator, you can have a constant flow of fuel to keep it going, which is, somewhat predictable. When it comes to a battery, you need to add extra batteries to make that work. There's a whole bunch more that he said, but essentially it comes down to the comparing them of essentially the way I look at it, and I tend to put things in a simplistic way. The one battery is like the 5-gallon tank on the generator. You get 2 batteries, now you have a 10-gallon tank on the generator. Essentially, that one of the challenges is if the power goes out in December, doesn't matter if we get in the daytime again, because I'm probably not going to get enough sun to fully charge one of those batteries. And that's where the technology is not there yet. We see the technology keep getting better. But one of the things I didn't bring up that I'm going to bring up real quick is when I bought panels, I thought, well, here's a panel that's this big and it's 370 watts. They make a 400 watt panel. I bet it's the same size. It's not, it's just bigger. The panels just get bigger to get higher capacity. The technology isn't there yet where we can make more power out of the same size device. And it's hard to know how quickly that's going to come. My crystal ball on that one is very foggy. I'm a fan of Stanoshensky, who passed away a few years ago. Stanoshensky, created some of the original batteries and solar shingles and all this. And yet we haven't seen any of it. He created it, but it's not there. So first question is, if you have an outbuilding that has power going to it, can we put the solar on that outbuilding to feed the whole house? And unfortunately, no. So what has to happen is we got to get to the original panel. So say we fed just the pole barn panel, then well, you could probably get the pole barn to go, but it wouldn't feed the house. What has to happen, I typically say with somebody who has a pole barn, you might have the resources to trench yourself another line and put in a conduit with wire and get to it. Otherwise, our guys go out there and some houses we have the folks come out with the fancy systems that can tunnel underground. Not much more expensive than digging, worth it if you don't want to dig up your yard, but you need to do that. Now, the question about the batteries in the barn, you want the batteries to be a certain temperature to work the best possible. If the barn is not super warm, they're not going to work at the optimal power level. It's not uncommon for somebody to take and say, we're putting it in the spot, and they put a 10 by 10 area with insulation and sheetrock or drywall, and even possibly a little heater or something in to make the batteries keep working better. To me, there's always the question of efficiency versus, so I think in general, your batteries are going to function better. But the problem is most of the municipalities in the state are moving toward batteries have to be in a garage or outside or in a different spot, because there are a lot of batteries out there that we don't carry. I won't say what their names are, but they're very common names people think of that have had fires and issues. So yeah, those are some of the limitations is that we have to work with the municipality. Yeah, it all depends on you look at your daily consumption, but if you've got heat pumps running and stuff like that, one of the other current limitations, I believe, and I could be a little bit wrong in this, Allie, who's on the Zoom call, she might correct me on this, but in a residential home with a 200 amp service, you can have up to 5 power walls. You suddenly get to a 400 amp service, you can get maybe 10 power walls, but you're limited on the number of power walls you can put in just for code.
Dan, I wanted to bring up sort of time of use, peak load shaving, so a couple of things on that. Someone made a really good point here on the chat about the conversation that's going on between gas backup and battery, whereas gas backup, to my knowledge, is not, generators are not being used, not firing those up from 2 to 7 or whatever, everyone calling in your peak time is, right? And so they're saying, of course, there's a lot more value to the battery for that application. And if I also understand right, there's conversations about, is it really placing solar on the south side to maximize kilowatts? Does it make more sense now for like more western facing solar to maximize
the demand peak times, at least in the United States, you know, it might
Yeah.
be different in other places of the world. Can you speak to sort of our storage and solars as we shift into a world where we're getting charged more in the middle of the day and charged less at night?
It's an interesting question from the GreenHome Institute of of talking about peak times and talking about how, when we pay for power differently all of the time. I can say definitely for me, when I said the summertime was my favorite time, that's because of peak time. So what happens with consumers' energy, at least, is a DTE kind of moves around a little bit more sporadically, I believe, which is frustrating. Consumers' energy very clearly says from this time until this time, you know, May until September, from 2 o'clock until 7 o'clock, you're paying peak time pricing. Peak time pricing tends to be about 33% more than regular pricing. And that's because air conditioners kick on. At the same time, as a solar user, I'm getting more credits at the peak time. My credits are worth more. So when I'm getting the money back from them, that carries me a lot further into the winter, which is fantastic. Now, one of the things Brett was asking was, if we have all these peak times in the future, should we be aiming solar panels at the directions of the peak time, essentially? I have a weird theory looking at my house because I have panels on 4 sides. I believe my east facing are my second most efficient. My west facing tends to be when the days get a little more hazy, tends to be when the heat's built up a little bit more, so the panels are less efficient. So I think that south is your most efficient, east is your second, west is your third, and north is a distant fourth. But if you were to be lucky enough to have a south facing ground array, you're still getting a huge portion of that, even as you're getting to the end of the day. If your problem is when you've got that 12-12 roof and it's on the east side, you pretty much lose it when the sun is getting to the afternoon.
Can I add that?
Yeah.
But the other thing too is the sun exposure. So it's not so much what time of the day are you targeting with your electricity or your solar production. It's more so the overall sunlight exposure and hours of exposure throughout the day. So it may be more beneficial to target that time frame for having more eastern panels. But overall, you're going to get more sun exposure throughout the day to have south facing panels. So where those east facing panels might only get 8 hours of exposure or production, you might get 10 out of south facing. But during those 2-hour windows that makes the difference between the two, you might see more of an impact on that afternoon bill or that peak rate, as opposed to having it south facing, you know, if that makes sense. So you can target it in the sense to diminish your bill at that time. But overall, it's going to be essentially the same impact, just because we're going to have that longevity throughout the day overall.
And I'd like to add to that. So that was Ashton, who also works with us. Ashton has a lot of experience, but also when you get to winter time, the sun starts to go down in the sky quite dramatically. And that west is barely west at that point when it's down over here. I still feel like your south is your money pot.
Yeah, because I mean, overall, throughout the year, throughout each season, it's the annual production and output that you're going to want to look at, not so much day to day or hour to hour. It's going to be annual. Is what you're going to want to see as far as savings go.
I know this is always a loaded question, but you can try to be brief on it. And I know it's, you know, it's going to be different on where people are located, but of course, everyone wants to know costs for these kinds of systems. And of course, you've got the Inflation Reduction Act, 30% tax credit if you have a liability, is my understanding. I've personally been able to leverage it, and I didn't think I would. I thought, you know, I didn't think I was in that tax bracket. So, and that was before IRA came out. That was the older.
Yeah.
So can you speak to, you know, the incentives and costs at a high level that people should expect when they're trying to make these decisions?
Yeah. So what should we expect for cost on these things? I would speak more generally to a roof system because there's less extra costs that go into it, and more specifically a shingle roof system. in general, it's hard for us to say what the cost is, but if somebody put a gun to my head and said, what does it cost for a 12 kilowatt system? About $40,000, give or take. What does it cost for a 12 kilowatt system? About, around 20 grand, give or take. It changes depending on where it is, of course, because of trenching out to a barn or clamping onto a steel roof. But one thing that is for certain right now is until 2032, we have a 30% tax credit, which very similar to Brett, I had a 26% tax credit 2 years ago, and I was able to get it all back, which was fantastic. I could use it to re-amortize my loan and make my solar payments less. But there's some other things that happen, like right now at the green panel, Tesla panels have a $500 rebate. I know that's just $500 in your $20,000 system, but every penny counts to me. Tesla batteries have $500 rebates right now, each battery, which is fantastic. But also some municipalities, the question was brought up, I think Lauren asked about Lansing. Right now, Lansing has initiatives for people. They're popping up all over, but we had one in Sterling Heights about 3 months ago. And Sterling Heights had a bundle of money that is available for some sort of improvements with energy. And it could be heating, it could be, heat pump, all kinds of things. I personally had one. I think Ashton had one where somebody claimed that money, and it's lucky they did, because in 9 days it was gone.
Well, it was a grant.
Yeah, $1 million grant that was claimed within 90 days, or not 9 days, 9 days, only 9. But so they're happening. Like there's murmurings that Grand Haven's going to do that. They battle in the legislature at all times. It helps to keep that leadership aware of your importance of this. Keep talking to the legislature and leadership. Yes.
Would it be fair to say we've got to talk louder than the major utilities?
The utilities are very loud. We have a beautiful governing board that tells the utilities what they can do, but they've got a lot of weight behind the utility side of things. I think it's worth being loud anyway. There's a opposite side of people when it comes to this conversation that are very loud at all times. I think as a renewable energy advocate and a diversified energy lover, I have to be loud. There's a Apple box sitting behind the camera person. I need to stand on that and start talking about it because, I am personally pushing the city of Grand Rapids to allow the wind turbines. The reason why we can't do them is because when you say to a city, I want to do wind turbines, what do they imagine? One of these giant towers with 3 big blades on it. They can't imagine it another way. So their rules say we can't do it because we don't want that. They've not imagined this other method. So I pushed the city when I put east facing front panels on my house because they said you can't do it. And I have them. I had to push and push and push. And I personally go into the city myself and go, hey, it's good to see you. Let's talk. But when I'm doing it, I'm friendly and say, but this isn't logical, is it? And they suddenly just sign things. So I think it's worth being vocal. People like the GreenHome Institute, and there's several other organizations who are all great about trying to spread the word. We have a gentleman here right now too, who's got an idea for putting houses in that are net zero, I think. All of these are great ideas, but make no mistake, it's taking them work to make them happen. And it's taking a lot of battling with the cities and stuff to make it happen, but it's not battling like we're fighting for blood. We're fighting for future.
What is the alternative wind thing you're talking about?
If you search Netherlands flower wind turbine, yeah, you'll probably see the company in Texas that's manufacturing them. If you find the Netherlands page, actually search for the .nl. They're so pretty. They'll paint them like tulips. What's that? Yeah, we'll have to hope that you can import them from the Netherlands then. Right now, it's not realistic for anybody around here, but I swear it will be in 5 years.
Actually, Dan, we're actually at our time right now. We can hang out live here all together and keep answering and ask questions if you want to stick around, right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, we're going to wrap up. So just one question for you. Where can people go to learn more about the green panel and what you do? on all that.
Yeah, so best place is to go to greenpanel.com. Greenpanel.com has spots where you can actually request more information. Just send us that utility bill and your address right off the bat, save a lot of time. Or you can call the Green Panel's main number, which I'm not gonna say mine because I want people to talk to Blake. He's the friendly one. You can call the Green Panel's main number. That's probably the best way to get to us is, I guess, start with greenpanel.com. We're also pretty heavily on social media that you can find us and see things that are happening. Well, I appreciate everybody who came into the Green Panel, who tuned in because it's 1970 into the live stream. And welcome anybody else that's here to keep talking. So thank you so much.